Welcome to the podcast where together, every Monday, we explore hospitality in its very broadest sense. From culture and cooking, cocktails and coffee, nutrition and farming, politics and animal welfare, organic and sustainability, family and business, entrepreneurship, and much, much more. Come and learn with me, Mark Cribb, about where our food and our drink comes from, and the businesses and, more importantly, the human beings that thrive on where we decide to spend our time and our money. Sign up to our weekly newsletter at humansofhospitality.co.uk and hit subscribe on your podcast player of choice. Welcome to this week's episode, released on the 5th of April, so just 1 week before indoor hospitality reopens in England. I have to say I'm confused at the moment as to whether that is the same in Scotland and Wales, but let's certainly say that vaccines across the country appear to be working well, and we are a hell of a lot closer to opening than we were to closing. I hope you are all hanging on in there, whether desperate to open your own venue or get back to work or simply go out and enjoy some great British hospitality. My team and I are certainly working hard trying to fathom how on earth do you run a restaurant outside with the quirks of the British spring. It's certainly going to be a challenge. I just hope the public have invested in some thermals and a sense of humour. Certainly though, I'm bloody excited to open the doors in some way. I'll keep you posted how that goes. Now, this week's guest will provide a great example of the variety and enjoyment in a life spent trying to understand and provide better food. Phil Haughton has had a great food adventure over many decades, and he's just written a book, Food for Thought, that brings together this journey combined with recipes and producers he's met along the way. Phil's current business is the better food stores and cafes dotted around Bristol. That combination of combining the hospitality of a cafe, drawing people into the building, and then hopefully inspiring them to leave with some exceptionally ethical and delicious food and drink is the evolution of a lifetime's learning for Phil and now his wider team. Despite Phil's desire for all organic, he is pragmatic enough, particularly after previous insolvencies, to recognise you do also have to sell what the customer is willing to buy. Perhaps rather than seeking ethical perfection, we must take people on a journey in smaller steps. An upgrade to free range may sometimes be more palatable than fully organic for some products. Now, Phil has travelled the country finding the best suppliers, has set up and invested in community farms, has lived in a practical commune in Scotland learning how to live off the land. He set up and closed a veg box delivery business, has found the takings from his business tucked away in the bottom of the freezer, and has defended the ethics to sell meat in a considered and informed way. In essence, through a lifetime of learning and business, Phil no longer has to think about the provision of food and farming in hospitality in the UK. He knows how it works. He can see the challenges, but has some great informed perspectives on what and how we can be better. I really hope you enjoy the conversation. And as always, if you do, please can you leave a review on your podcast player of choice. It feels like a fair ask, so I hope you don't mind me mentioning it again. I take a day out to research, record, edit and upload the show, and in return you Google how to leave a review. On Apple Podcasts it's super easy, on other devices it can be a smidgen more of a challenge, but it's generally possible. Failing that, don't forget on the website you can also become a patron of the show or make a donation by hitting the donate button. Every penny you spend goes into supporting the tech and time to find more great guests to explore the amazing humans behind the hospitality, food and drink world. That's humansofhospitality.co.uk. Okay, thank you for your support, and now let's get over and meet Phil. Cheers. Phil Haughton, founder of Better Food and author of the book Food for Thought. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Really appreciated. And you've been on this amazing food adventure for pretty much your whole life, Phil. It's hard to imagine anyone who could have more knowledge from a lifetime's work in better food and sort of better soil health. So really excited to chat to you today. But before we get going, can you just explain where in the world are you, please, Phil?
Hi, morning, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm in the Chew Valley, which is just south of Bristol city, where I live, and I work from home quite a lot, and then I go into the shops and stuff in Bristol.
Nice. Is this a response to COVID, or have you worked from home for quite some time?
I've always worked, well, not always actually, but since I've been less at the coalface, as it were, more working on development, etc., then I've had more opportunity to be at home, and it works quite well for me because I like variety, and I can sit at the desk for a few hours, and then I can go into the garden and dig some carrots or whatever, or do a bit of potting or something. So
Yeah.
I like to split my day up a little bit.
Perfect. I imagine you've got a pretty decent garden growing at home, have you?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah,
of
wouldn't
course.
be without it. Mind
Yeah,
you, I used to when I was growing vegetables commercially, as it were. I didn't because it was a bit close to Newcastle. So.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, good. Well, look, we'll come into the reasons why. So before, we're going to dive into a whole heap of issues because of that knowledge you've got, and we'll dive into a bit of your background, which will give sort of, the background info, I suppose, as to why you're so knowledgeable. But before we go there, let's just sort of, start at the end before we go back to the beginning. You've got 3 better food stores at the moment in Bristol. For people that don't know you and they don't know the stores, can you just explain a little bit about them? Why are they so unique and what do you do?
So yeah, we've got 3 stores which are based on the principle of we want as much organic food in there as we possibly can. So we're not precious about it, but it's a place where you can go to buy pretty much all your groceries and well-being. So we've got health and beauty and toiletries and gifts and all that as well. But the foundation of it is around fresh, good ingredients that are organically produced, and they're in neighbourhood areas of Bristol, which is where we find that there is the most demand for that sort of thing. And it also helps us to build a sense of community. So they very much are stores based at in the heart of communities and providing a real service. And we kind of take that view of service and hospitality very seriously. We are there to serve, we are there to care and to meet people's needs. So I think that kind of encompasses more or less what we do.
Yeah, and you've also got a cafe element to it. Is that right? And am I right
Yeah,
in saying that's sort of become more important with your most recent one, compared to the early days?
yeah, no, absolutely. When we opened our big store in St Werburgh's back in 2002, it was actually the beginning was quite tough getting it really going and getting it accepted. Um, some people saw it as, oh, it's that organic shop and I can't afford it. And interestingly, we decided to put a cafe in about 4 years after we arrived. And when we did, people came in for the cafe. And whilst they were in, oh, I'll just go and get some milk, or I'll just go and get some butter. Oh, that's convenient. And they started to realize that actually it's not always that expensive. And actually, also, I really like this place, and I like the feeling that I get when I buy food here. And I love the food that I eat when I get home. And so it really helped to bridge that gap. And so from there on, we decided that we wanted places of hospitality to sit and eat, as well as shop, to be a part of all our shops, if it was at all possible, if the size of the shop allowed for it.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I think you're right. I think people can feel almost intimidated by a shop, particularly one that's a bit unusual, and that they think they might not be the right demographic, I guess, price wise. But people are so comfortable just to walk in somewhere and order a coffee. So I can see how that would lead in. I always think retail. I think hospitality is a sort of insanely complicated and tight margin business, and I've been doing it for sort of 16 or 17 years, and a very little hair left as a result of it. But I always think retail also looks incredibly tight margin, incredibly tough. You do both. So you must be bonkers. But I've got to ask, which is the harder, cafe or retail?
Oh, catering is the harder, actually, because we commit to using pretty much 100%. We're on about 95% organic in our cafe offerings, and that is great, and it's what we want to do. But it comes at a price tag, as you know, and yet hospitality doesn't say, "Yeah, we're really happy to pay 25% more because it's organic." So we have to pretty much go like for like with the rest of the industry, comparable, and that makes it tougher margin than most catering outfits. And as you know, margin is so, yeah, it's pretty critical.
Yeah,
Um,
it's annoying, isn't it? You can do so much cool stuff if you could just forget about it. But
yeah,
unfortunately,
but we
it's
love it as well. We're really committed to it, and we love it, and our customers love it. And in the round, we make it work. Um, and we make sure we have a break-even target on our catering outfits, and they just about do that. So that's that. They wash their face, as it were.
okay. That's interesting.
And
And I want to come in a little bit later to sort of organic supply in restaurant world because I think it's challenging. So super impressive that you've got to 95%. But unfortunately, the question for me that sort of jumps out: what's the 5% that's too difficult? Then what's the sort of thing that you can't do organic?
Well, there's just a number of items in grocery that either are unobtainable organic. So let's think of a range that's not very well developed in organic. So some of the organic cakes and biscuits range, they're a bit limited. Um, what else? Some of the herbs and spices, some of the quality of some of the non-organic herbs and spices are so much better than the organic ones that we can get. That's not to say we don't do a lot of really good organic ones, but there are certain elements where it's a bit more difficult. Vegan is really difficult to provide the range that we would like organic. So we also buy in some non-organic. And then meat and eggs, we choose to do free range poultry and free range eggs. Um, at the moment, we do. We're having conversations about wanting to push it out, and it's quite interesting because it's a dialogue around accessibility and trying to welcome as many people as possible, but without compromising our fundamentals. And um, so we do stock free range eggs and we do stock free range chickens, but we're having good, strong conversations about the future of that at the
That's
moment.
interesting. Is that a price decision? Or?
It's a price decision, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, free range eggs and free range chickens are significantly cheaper than organic eggs and organic poultry
Yeah.
because the nature of it, the standards, the welfare elements of it require so much more. Like you just take free range and organic free range. That soil association organic free range, you can't clip their beaks. Your flock numbers have to be significantly lower. The range that they have has to be significantly higher in comparison with standard free range. So
Interesting.
there are a lot of on costs before you actually get to the price of the wheat or the barley or the oats or whatever that you're having to feed organically as well.
Okay, I have this conversation with my chef sometimes with free range as well, but they find the more free range, the more sort of I suppose closer to organic or wilder the bird gets. And I've not necessarily proved this, but this is their theory: is that they find that the meat toughens, and actually they think whether it's because of the sort of muscular use that the birds get if they've got more space and stuff like that. But my chefs will argue till they're blue in the face that it's harder for them to get a really tender organic chicken than it is to get a free range one. I don't know. Have you heard of that before?
I've not actually. I mean, I can imagine what maybe it is a muscular thing and a feed thing to a degree. So it's possible. I mean, they tend to have a lower water content. So when you roast an ordinary chicken alongside an organic chicken, and you do them in exactly the same conditions, the weight loss due to water will be less in an organic chicken. So maybe something to do with muscle density and stuff makes a difference. Um,
Okay. Well, they always look at me, with a great deal of earnest kind of looks when they tell me, and I give them that skeptical kind of because for me, it's all about telling the best story that we can. Although you're
yeah,
right.
but also the other thing, Mark, is that chickens traditionally used to. I was talking about this. I'd just done a little video about eggs, the chicken and the egg, actually. But it's not that many generations ago where we had dual-purpose birds that laid enough eggs to keep us happy, and but were also quite good. The males were pretty good for meat, um, but they would be grown for longer, so they weren't pushed really hard, which inevitably meant that they were probably a bit tougher. But then what we would always traditionally have done is we would have hung them, a bit like you would hang games. So you don't actually you would pluck them, but you would not eviscerate them. You would leave them hanging 4 or 5 days and then eviscerate them, and that tenderizes the meat, and it also brings up the flavors. But there is no commercial gain for people. They lose weight and they lose time, so it costs. So nobody does it.
Okay. That's probably a good little segue then. So with all of this learning that you've done and the reasons that we'll come to in a minute, you've also just written a book. It's sat here on my desk in front of me. I've been enjoying that over the last few days. So Food for Thought. We'll come into the details of it shortly, but was there a trigger? Why did now feel like the right time to get your sort of, I suppose it's your journey and your adventure in food, but also, quite a lot of thoughts around, how the food system was, how it should be, and maybe the direction we're going in. What was the trigger to write that now?
It was really the stage in my career where I was beginning to step back from the coalface, so I wasn't as stupidly busy as I had been most of my life, and able to get a bit more of a perspective. And actually, the process of stepping back in itself was challenging and really fascinating. But it provided me with a different view of things and a bit more of time for reflection. And I thought, okay, I might put some of this, pen to paper on this. And I started writing one Monday morning as a sort of chronological life story with philosophizing as I went along and invitations to explore different elements of the food system. And I was enjoying it so much, and I just sat down every Monday for about sort of between 2 and 4 hours for about, I don't know, 9 months or something, and it just flowed out. The book, as it is now, is very, very different. It's not chronological, and it's got a lot more color and depth to it in lots of ways. So it's much more than just my story. It's lots of people's stories, and so I invited 12 people to participate in it. People who I respect in food, in farming, in community, in business, to add their dimension and their perspective, so that it had a kind of generous, rounded feel to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. It's unusual, actually, isn't it? Because you've got lots of sort of recipe ideas in there, but I suppose those recipes have come about as a result of the stories you're telling. So whether that's families, mum members, I think it was your mum's bread, maybe, was it, and or whether it's some of the suppliers you've worked with. But it's it's a nice read because you feel like you're going on this adventure and this journey, and then you slide in some activities to do with the kids. And I love that photo of you. I think it's 1976 up in Scotland, the sort of black and white image of the extended family, which we're going to come on to a little bit in a minute. But you even got Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall to write the intro. Is he a friend of yours? Or?
Yeah, I haven't known Hugh all that many years, but I've met him a few times at food festival kind of things, and he knew and worked with my brother Barney, who's a chef. So they worked together on food festivals. So I got to know him a little bit, and then he came to live in Bristol for a while and started using our White Ladies Road shop quite a lot, and he launched a restaurant just further up the road in White Ladies Road, Bristol. And so I saw him a bit in there, and we got talking. And I really respect what he's been doing around food and environment with his TV and journalism. And he was very generous and agreed to help with and put the forward together for the book. I was delighted.
Excellent. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, funny enough, I was chatting to his PR team last week, so I'm hoping to get him on the podcast at some point as well. So if you bump into him, then put in a good word.
I will indeed. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. So it'd be really easy to sort of think, okay, great, yeah, here's a guy. He's got some shops. He sells a bit of organic food, lovely, and a few cafes. But I think the journey that you've been on to get there is fascinating, but also who you supply with. So I want to touch on the community farm first of all. So one of your key partners and the suppliers for you. I think you also helped start it. Can you tell me a little bit about that project, why you're involved, and how important are they, that sort of seed to not seed to plate, although I suppose it is to the cafe, but certainly seed to store kind of story?
Yeah, so I got involved in growing again when we had just one store, the St Werburgh store, the flagship store, if you like. We took on a Victorian walled garden, and when we outgrew that, we had the option to move to a site in the Chew Valley, and I said to the guy who was offering this really good land, look, I'm not sure that I want to do this anymore on my own, because I keep on finding that I'm spending 10 hours growing and then another 10 hours trying to run the business, sort of thing. And there's no time left to sleep or anything. But I am really quite interested in the idea of exploring doing it with other people. And that's Luke Hazel, who owned the land, was also really interested in that idea. And so we kind of got together and started hatching a vision. And so at the time where we landed on that land, about 11 years ago now, 12 years ago, I was growing, retailing, wholesaling, and had a box scheme. So what we then did was we said, look, okay, the community farm, in order to be what we envisaged it to be, needs to have a trading base. And so we gave them the business of wholesale and the business of the box scheme as a sort of founding trading activity within it, which immediately gave it cash flow and the potential to make profits, which would then help for them to do some really good work around helping people to understand what food and farming was all about, and doing lots of volunteering and stuff like that. And it wasn't without its challenges, particularly in the early days, but it's grown enormously and is now a mature and flourishing community farm where thousands of children and adults have been through attending courses or volunteer days or tours around the farm, all sorts of things. And its relationship for Better Food has been one where we bought produce from them from day one. So there's been a supportive long-term relationship, and it's just such a lovely story to be able to tell when you're selling some salad or some greens or whatever it is in the shops, come from the community farm, and then you give them a link and they find out the story, and then they say, oh, I'd quite interested in that, and they go off and they volunteer there, and they discover more about the food chain and what it takes to grow good organic food. So yeah, in a way, job done, and it's lovely to see it flourishing.
Yeah, amazing. I was reading about it and I thought this is great. And I often think with these things, what a wonderful idea they are. And then I get excited and I think, what you were just saying is that, life's so busy anyway, kids and a dog and business and all this sort of thing. And you realize just how much work it would be to create something like that. And you wonder why other people aren't doing it locally. And so much of the really cool stuff that I hear about in food and drink tends to be very Bristol centric. You seem to have this really good sort of culture there. How hard is it for places? Well, I suppose, are you aware of others, dotted around the country, or actually is it really difficult? Is it the uniqueness of the fact that you almost, you gave it to them at a point where it could be financially stable, and then they've got access to sell via you? Does that feel like a one-off, or does that feel like, people around the country could get inspired and set up something similar?
I think people around the country could and actually are inspired to do things, and certainly there's been lots of people who've come through the community farm who been there specifically to dig and to find out and to learn, and that's part of the remit of the farm, is to openly and generously help others to do other similar things. It's never financially easy, outfits like that. As soon as you become a community outfit where you've got lots of interests and you're doing lots of social good, if you like, the bottom line is harder and harder to achieve, something positive, and you're pretty much always dependent on grants to a degree as well. But I think one thing, Mark, is that we're at a point now where there's such an awakening around the world, and that the young people are really starting to be more courageous about doing things because there's so much at stake. And whether it's a community farm or a community cafe or all sorts of elements that are challenging the status quo about how we do business and challenging uh, capitalism, even sort of fairly fundamentally saying that the system's got to change. And the food system, as we know well, has really got to change. It's so fundamentally uh, broken. And the young people are really, to me, are really inspiring because they're getting out there and they're making so many new things happen, and they're expanding at a rate. I was at a conference, Oxford Real Farming Conference, which went online because of COVID and went international, and it had 5,500 delegates over a 7-day period. And it was so inspiring to hear of all these projects all over the world, of what people are up to make a difference and to kind of reset the dial on what we've grown accustomed to and how much it needs to change.
Mm. I was interviewed Guy Watson, who I presume you know
Yeah,
from Riverford, and I was asking him sort of his levels of optimism or pessimism, I suppose, on the direction and the trajectory, because in some of his videos, he talks about, I can't remember how many it is, but maybe there's only 30 cycles in the soil left. So some of it can be very depressing, but there also does feel like there is maybe finally this groundswell, I suppose. You talk about this need to shift all farming from an industrial to a human scale. What do you mean by that?
I mean that the food system is so broken and got into the hands of so few people, in terms of um, the financial powerhouse behind it all, whether it's retail or growing seed companies, chemical companies, etc., etc. It's really so desperately broken and not operating one iota in the interests of humanity, what it is to be human, that I feel like we need a real check, uh, to say why do we bother existing? Why do we bother producing food? Well, it's to feed and nourish a being, and uh, the more that we can start to reconnect with that, the more chance I think we have of not only solving the food system that's broken, but also solving what I also think has been going alongside all of this, is that we've become less and less human. We've kind of, in a way, been on a program of dehumanizing humans. And a part of the awakening that's going on, I think, at the moment is about, well, that really hasn't worked, and the more that we can get back to that, and I think one of the clearest routes is to be involved in our food system, to be involved in growing and producing food. So returning to the land in the way that we haven't done for centuries, um, I think is fundamental to our future well-being, whether we ever will. But if we can go in that trajectory, I think, which I think we, some of us are, I think the more chance we've got of sorting out food, sorting out climate, and being happier as humans on planet Earth, and maybe not fighting quite so much. Maybe,
Yeah,
maybe that's
agreed.
emphasizing, but it's a strong, passionate feeling I have. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I very much hope you're right. I think I can't remember where I read this, but there was this concept of, we industrialized food because maybe post-war era we wanted to make sure that we could feed the planet, growing population, and if you sit down with a farmer and you say, look, we can't feed the world this way, we can't feed the world organically, we can't do this, and actually, the farmer's sort of response was, look, I'm not trying to feed the world, I'm just trying to feed, my local village or local villages or my community. Do you think that's the answer? Do you think we need to get back to this sort of more localized rather than either nationalized or internationalized, or is it some sort of compromise between that?
I think to a degree, certainly for the foreseeable future, it's going to be a compromise, and maybe that's a good thing, because we can always learn from things going on further afield. But I think that the request to farmers has got to change. Yes, we're not asking you to feed the world; we're asking you to feed the people around you. And if you start with that premise, you're inevitably going to need to feed those people first, and you'll have surplus that will go to feed other people, and likewise they'll have some surplus to feed you of items that you don't have. So I think the whole notion of and wonderful elements of trade will carry on, and the movement of goods will carry on. But if it can be founded more in the vein of, I guess part of what we're doing is, we as a company tend to make sure that we have long-term relationships with our suppliers and build a respect and a rapport with them. And we don't just say, we're hard-nosed and that's it. If you don't do this, then you can move on. So I think I think respect is at the heart of good relationships, and that the more local they are, the easier it is to have those relationships and to respect the people who are producing the food.
Mm. And this is, you've always felt this, Phil. This isn't a sort of a new thing, is it? So back in 1972, and my son would be absolutely devastated if I did this, but your mum, for your 14th birthday, bought you a subscription to the Soil Association. I can't even get my kids to listen to the podcast that I did with Helen from the Soil Association, let alone read a subscription. What motivated your mum to do that? And where did that, how come at such a young age you already had this interest?
I think for Mum, it was almost sort of living out something that she hadn't fulfilled to the extent that she wanted to. So I think she was pretty passionate about food, farming, and soil health. And she introduced me to a book by Newman Turner called Fertility Farming, and then another one, Fertility Pastures or something like that. I can't remember now. But that was way, way, way back. And so I think when she gave it to me, she saw that I was helping in the garden and kind of intrigued by what was going on in nature. And I think she also saw that I was a bit kind of bereft and bewildered by life and wasn't quite sure what it was all about. And typical teenager to a degree, but well, maybe not typical. I don't know. And so when I got this present, I was kind of like, what? I'm 14. What do I want with that? Where's the comic? Where's the fun? Where's the club? But I started reading, and it just, it triggered something in me, and I carried on reading, and the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah. No, what a cracking start. Because you didn't really, school wise, I guess traditional education wasn't really your bag. Am I right in saying you ended up, actually being asked to leave school? Do you think the world of food and drink and farming and hospitality, do you think it provides that sort of alternative vocation and career for those, who perhaps are not perfectly suited to the very compliant and formulaic education structure that we seem to have?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many aspects to education that don't work in certain ways for certain people, and I think it's a much bigger sector of society than we care to admit sometimes. But I think if you think of three elements: head, heart, and hands. Hands are, they're so tactile, they're so fundamental to so many of us, and yet in education they're so lacking in terms of recognizing their importance in somebody's life and livelihood and career path. They're just not seen as being very important. That it's just laboring, but it's so much more than just laboring. And of course, head is very useful, but it can also be a hindrance. So if you don't kind of merge, I suppose, all three of those elements, head, heart, and hands, you can get a bit of imbalance. But I think if you're confused as a young person, or you're just not really engaged with maths or English or history, or the whole education system, very often coming back to something that's tactile, like cutting vegetables, it gives you something very purposeful and very easy in a way to feel like you're achieving something. I've made a dish, wow, and I can eat it and I can share it with people, and it's being appreciated. And I think that appreciation is something that's at the heart of hospitality. We love the fact that others are eating something that we've created and they're enjoying it.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I think it's just hardwired into some people as a bit of a reflex. And I do love our sector, and I would say, food and hospitality combined for that, in the fact it's full of such amazing, creative people. I remember when we did a survey, I employed just over 100 people, and I can't remember what the question was, but we worked out that the vast majority of people either owned crayons or a guitar. It was basically they were into art or they were into musicians, and it's just such an interesting, such an eclectic bunch of people who are really good fun to spend time with. Talking of which, one of the favourite bits of the book that I read was back when you in 1974 moved up, and I don't know if I pronounced this correctly, but Lothlorien, is it?
Lothlorien.
Yeah, Lothlorien, and that looked like a really special kind of place. Do you mind just talking a little bit about about what went on there and your Lothlorien adventure?
Yeah, no, indeed. I mean, Lothlorien, the word comes from the Tolkien books. Tolkien, as we know, did a whole series of books, and Lothlorien was a place of refuge. So that's where it got its name from. But we were kind of a mad, slightly dysfunctional, very large family in the 70s, and more disillusioned with what was going on. Or my parents were, and my eldest brothers were in society, and my dad was a teacher, and he was depressed and he was fed up. My mum wanted to get out of the rat race, and so we kind of did that back to the land, sort of John Seymour thing. But very quickly, people started turning up from all family, friends, and friends of friends, and we realised that there was quite a number of people who were turning up who weren't necessarily in a really great shape. They were depressed, or they were suffering from drug addiction or other mental health things, and they found that working and living with us in this community sort of setting, they found it to be very healing. And so we became a trust and set ourselves up to be a place where you would come and kind of recuperate from whatever world stresses you'd been dealing with, but based around full participation in the work of the community, which was very much back to the land. I was running the farming, and my brother Mark was running the gardens, and Ben, my eldest brother, was heading up the building. And we built a massive log house with 12 or so bedrooms. And so it was a kind of an exploration into communes, sort of hippie communes, but so much more than that, a really strong sense of community, quite a strong sense of Christianity, certainly for the first sort of 5 or 8 years or so. And a place of healing. And certainly for me, I was a bit of a mess. Well, I was quite a lot of a mess, actually, as a late teenager. I was depressed and angry and confused, and being with nature and farming gave me a great sense of purpose, and also a great sort of sanctuary of kind of bathing in the wonders of the hills and fields around Lothlorien, which were Galloway in southwest Scotland.
Yeah, amazing. It looked really interesting, and what I loved as well is this sort of sense of sort of gratitude at the simple things. I suppose there was this sort of little section where you were explaining just the complexity of running water, because this was really basic when you first got there, wasn't it? It was just land next to a patch of woods, and then it was a case of getting the water in the bucket, and then you moved on to a hose in the ground, and you hand pumped it, and eventually a generator, and as you say, ultimately you built a house. Does that sort of knowledge, I suppose, stay with you, that sense of gratitude of the simple things? If you have to go to that much work and that many years simply for the ability to turn on a tap, do you think that stays with you?
I think I lost it for a long time, but I regained it about 10 years ago, kind of, really remembering some of the simple things and how we take them for granted. And we've all experienced that during COVID. Some of the things that we've experienced during COVID is like, you really do appreciate sitting across the table from somebody when you can't, that kind of thing. But I think that observation around water supply, which was, it was a journey from having to use buckets to using a hose pipe, and then the hose pipe froze, and then you bury it, and so you're protected from the frost, and then you put a generator in to pump the water, and so it's progress. And not only do you appreciate what you've got, but also I think it's a learning in when is enough. And I think that's something that is a really big question for us in humanity. When is enough? Do we now need robots to take over? What do you call them? CIs, or is it CIs? I'm not
Don't
sure.
know. I don't want one
The
though.
robotic world.
Yeah, AI, I think, is it? Yeah, artificial intelligence, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry, AI. Sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But do we actually need that? Is that serving as humanity? Yes, of course we can go on developing and progressing, and we can go to Mars. Look, we've just dumped something on Mars a few weeks back. Um, does that really? So there's the can do, and there's the human curiosity to explore, which should never be dampened. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of room for reflecting on, does it really serve us? And what going further and say, what does actually serve us? And often simplicity and appreciation of the basics in life, like running water or electricity. I mean, it's a phenomenal thing, that electricity, that we're not having this conversation without it. Um, it is extraordinary, these sorts of things in the world, and telephones and these little mobiles and all this stuff is absolutely mind blowing on one level. Very, very few of us understand it, but we all take it for granted.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that just that gratitude for simple things, like you say, whether it be power or water, whatever it is. I lived in a camper van in Australia for 12 months, and it was 20 odd years ago now, and I was traveling for a couple of years. And I probably don't think about it as much as I used to, but I'm still pretty amazed that, you can just, I've even got one of those hot water taps now, so I can basically have a cup of tea whenever I want. There's permanently boiled water available to come out. And it sounds like such a hippie, but it blows my mind. I'm like, God, this is amazing. It's so convenient. But I think it's so important that we're sort of consciously show gratitude for it, and make a note. I imagine, as you said, writing the book and having all these memories and going on that journey was it's a healing process, but I imagine it was quite an enjoyable process.
Very enjoyable, yeah. I mean, like I said, going back to that Lothlorien time, I was a bit of a mess. So there was a lot of enjoyment, a lot of learning, but there was also a lot of pain. So it was kind of a mixed bag, all of that, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Did it teach you anything? Because there were quite often people there. I read, making food for 40 people from a caravan kitchen. That sort of natural looking after people and hospitality, and I suppose the confidence to be, to have to just walk into a room and engage with strangers. Was it good for you, that period, and giving you that confidence?
Yes, no, definitely. I've carried that, and I know a lot of people who were there, and the family who were there have carried that sense of self-confidence around food and around hospitality, and also an element of jack of all trades. You kind of get used to having to try your hand at all sorts of things, and definitely acknowledging master of none. But there's a real enjoyment in that breadth of being able to touch into things and enjoy quite a diverse life as a result.
Yeah, I bet. Good. Okay. Well, eventually that adventure finished. You moved back to Bristol. You became the manager at a city farm, Windmill Hill. But then, 1984 comes along. So this is your sort of heading into entrepreneurial, self-employed kind of thing, I guess, by the sounds of it. And you opened Real Food Supplies. That sounded really tough. Reading about you driving around the country, meeting, I suspect, all these amazing, farmers, and finding all this produce sounded incredible. But as is the case with so many entrepreneurs, that business became very popular, but ultimately failed. What did you learn from that business that you knew you had to do differently when you restarted your sort of next business?
I think, thinking about that period in my life, Mark, that one of the things about it was that I was so engrossed and so headstrong about what I wanted to do, so passionate, that it was kind of at the exclusion of everything else, and I didn't really care about business. All I cared about was getting this food and putting it in the shop. And that was the joy of actually people wanting it and the business growing constantly as a result, but with no real eye on good business acumen, to be honest with you. It was rather sad in some ways, but um, and I mean, I've learned so much from that period about what not to do. But it was a fascinating process that when it got to the point where interest rates were 15%, and I just opened another store, and I just borrowed more money to do that. It didn't occur to me at the time, oh gosh, this is 15%. That's really going to be quite crippling. I just thought, yes, I can do this. Yes, I can do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. It was almost irresponsible when I reflect on it, but I wasn't aware of it, so it wasn't irresponsible. I was just very, very eager to keep on making things happen. But it was that interest rates, and the fact that I was hiding a significant underperformance in the business margin-wise because I was growing. So cash was not too bad all the time. And then everything came home to roost. And I remember once realizing just how out of control I was when I went to the freezer to get something out of it. And in the bottom of the freezer, I found a packet, and it was the takings from a period over Christmas about 2 months before, which I hadn't even banked and hadn't realised were there, and was still kind of scratching my head as to why things were so bad. And that it was
Yeah.
like, okay, you're really not running a cool business here.
I think so many of us have been on that journey though, Phil, and I think you need to. I always think if you had all the information at the start, it would put you off doing things, and you need to go on that journey and learn. And I look back to the chaotic days early in my business. We were so close to going under on so many occasions, but you think, God, yeah, I suppose the question is, yeah, would you change it now, or do you think it was a necessary part of the evolution?
I wouldn't change it. The only thing that I regret about it is that, excuse me, is that I left a few people short of cash. I went bust, and some of those were farmers,
Yeah.
and that was tough.
Yeah, and I think there's a number that have been on that journey in the last 12 months with COVID. I think, isn't it? God, one of the hardest things I remember early in, when we shut down was about 120 grand that I owed various suppliers, and I was like, look, we'll do our very best to trade out of this, and luckily we have. But God, yeah, the emotional pressure of all those people that you owe money to can be a lot. Can't it?
No, absolutely. I
Yeah.
took to the drink a little bit at the end of that, and
You'd undid all that good sort of journey you'd been on in
yeah,
your in your
no,
Scottish
no,
adventures.
no
But
problem.
you clearly learnt some stuff then, because it wasn't long. How long was it before between shutting that down and how many? Sorry,
2 years, yeah.
wow, that's pretty fast. So yeah, what was next?
So, well, I restarted with all the learnings and what had happened to do something really simple, very straightforward, very uh, kind of tight in terms of controls. But again, very small. I started in my back kitchen doing home delivery again. Um, and that was born as Phil's Better Food campaign. So you can get the gist of it. It was still very much about a campaign to change the food system, um, knowing that there was a lot of people out there, not least of all my customers, who kept on sort of saying, when are you going to do something again? We can't get off organic food anymore. It was funny, actually. People were quite cross. I mean, genuinely, they were quite cross when I closed the previous one. So they were quite pleased when I started doing something else. And that Better Food campaign grew into the Better Food Company, which then morphed into Better Food. And so it was a box scheme, which then added meat and dairy and basic whole foods. And then after a couple of warehouses, we started opening up on a Saturday after we'd grown for about 3-4 years. And we had a kind of Saturday shop, which people loved, and it was a pack house, but people were able to go around the pack house and pick the items and bring them to the till at the end of the warehouse. And there was a kind of rustic joy about it. It was absolutely no frills, um, but very much appreciated, and that became the foundation for going into retail.
Yeah. And this time, presumably, then you were focused on margin and you weren't leaving your takings in the freezer. Was that the key difference?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was a much better managed company. Not brilliant at times, but generally speaking, I mean, we did still later in life get to a point like when we moved from the warehouse to the new shop. We didn't really have the money to do it well, so we were doing it on a wing and a prayer to a degree, um,
Yeah.
and it
That
took quite a
yeah.
while to get through that.
Yeah, how all the best businesses start. So you're quite unusual in the fact that I suppose I've seen a big growth in the food boxes, or certainly consciously noticed it in the last few years. But you went through that, trailblazing, I guess, and doing it, a long time ago. But made the conscious decision to come out of that and actually to get into the retail side, which now looks like the opposite to what lots of people were doing. What was the reason for the motivation for that, and ever tempted to get back into the food box? So I suppose you scratched that itch again with the community farm. But yeah, what's the reason for sticking to the retail side of it, the direct?
Well, the first reason for sticking to retail was when about a year after we moved into the new shop, uh, it had been a tough ride financially to get there, and we decided to take a good hard look at the business and what was working and what wasn't. And the home delivery was the bit that was least able to wipe its face. We were doing a 25-mile radius of Bristol, and every single grocery item, we had about 2,500 product lines. Um, and anybody who knows about home delivery knows that it's really tough. And so we decided to pull back from that and concentrate on retail. We then did actually start a box scheme a couple of years later, but again, trying to make sure that we didn't get tempted, because part of what happens, is that um, you get asked by people all the time, "Oh, can you do this for us? Can you?" And so you kind of get tempted into growing outside of a box. So this time I said, "Right, okay, that is the box. You can't change what goes into the box. We've got 5 boxes for you to choose from. End of story. If that doesn't work, then I'm sure there's other people who can serve you." And that was really quite successful. And that was what we then handed over to the community farm later, some years later. But
Yeah,
also, the fact that we were doing at one point, I was running a restaurant cafe next to the walled gardens, and we were wholesaling and retailing and doing a box scheme. It was too complex, and I was burning out because I was doing everything from the front line and didn't really understand how to do anything otherwise um, at the time. And so it was definitely time to shed some elements of it. And we decided that let's set up the community farm, but also let's give them the box scheme and the wholesale. And so we were able to focus pretty much on retail, and that made quite a difference to the structure of the business and to our focus, and gave me the time and um, resources to be able to really nail that. And then we started to grow. So we opened our second shop in White Ladies Road, and that was about 11 years ago now. Yeah, so
you've cracked on. I think all too often it's what you say no to is more important than what you say yes to, isn't it? And it is so tempting. And I've done exactly the same. Added more and more complexity to the business, and actually the benefit coming off the back of COVID is going to have is the need to have simplified that business. But I also take my hat off to anybody who does home delivery, because we, not in our niche at all, but we decided with Valentine's and all my chefs, being off at the moment, we thought, right, we'll bring them back from furlough. Let's get the team together and do a bit of a project. And we did a load of Valentine's boxes, and we decided, we'll just deliver them ourselves. We didn't really give that bit a lot of thought. We just thought, we'll make these amazing boxes, and we only sold 108, but it was decent. But my goodness, we learnt a lot on the day of delivery when we'd said pretty much to people, I think we'd drop them off between sort of 12 and 5, and we hadn't really worked out how long it takes. And then I think the first 18 boxes, which is all the ones furthest out of town, took us 3.5 hours, and quite quickly we realised that we were going to be working very late, and we ended up bringing in 3 extra cars, and we still didn't get all the food out until 10 o'clock that evening. So anybody who can do box delivery en masse is it's much more complicated than people think it is, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, it's something that most of us don't realise, but most home delivery, including the supermarkets, don't make money. It's a very, very labour intensive, crucifyingly difficult in margin.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's the same in restaurants. When people have said, "Oh, why don't you do home delivery now that all your restaurants are shut?" And you're like, "Look, the economics don't work. If I can open my restaurant and over the course of the day, at a busy seafront restaurant, maybe 300 people will come in, and I might have 100 of those might be in the building at the same time. But if you ask me to go out and feed those 100 of people by taking the food to their house that evening and dropping it off their doorstep, it's just completely inefficient. It's so much more efficient if I can bring the customer to me." So I just want to touch on, so you're sort of conscious of these sort of changing food trends, and it was really interesting to read. So, you hang your hat very clearly on the mantra of ethics and sustainability, and you do an incredible job of that. But it's always this case that if you stick your head above the parapet, some people will try and shout you down. So I know the public at times have been very critical of your decision to continue selling meat, for example, and you've got a very open and comprehensive response on your website as to why that's the case. So I just wanted to explore your thoughts a little bit on, I suppose, that that changing food trends, the rise of plant-based, and does meat consumption fit into our sort of sustainable future of food? What's your thoughts and knowledge around that?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Mark. And I touch on this quite a bit in the book as well, as you know. I think, first of all, I think I come from a perspective of how I view all of this as one of generosity and respect. So I really do respect those people who say no meat, or just all meat is bad, and I want to be vegan. And so I think that's a kind of starting point. I think one of the things that has happened very significantly, particularly around red meat, is that we've been told for a long time not to eat red meat for various reasons. And we have a real tendency to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and not to take a very holistic, broad view of how things are done. So we know that the consumption of beef across the planet is far, far too high. We know that the way in which it is produced in an industrial way is absolutely abhorrent and not fit for human consumption, in my view, and that it's damaging the rainforests, and that it's bad for the climate. All those things are absolutely true, and we really urgently need to do something about these things. However, there is an alternative, which goes back to something we touched on earlier a little bit, which was around deindustrializing our food system, and coming back to something that is a human scale. And when you localize food and you start thinking about what in my environment, what will my environment support by the way of food? If you take England, for instance, it's a very green, well-watered, grass-loving nation. And if you went to say, right, we're not going to eat any meat at all, we're actually then going to be ploughing a lot more land for pulses and beans and vegetables and what have you. Well, not the vegetable, because we actually need more of those, but the grains and the pulses and stuff. We're going to be ploughing, which is going to be releasing a vast amount of carbon from that soil, at a time where, if we do it right, and if we live within the framework of our environment, which is the green, pleasant land, it has an immense ability to sequester carbon. And part of looking after that and sequestering carbon is to have small volumes of livestock, ruminants within that. But so I'm all in favour of us continuing to champion really, really good quality meat, and with the suggestion, and no more than that, that we actually really consider how much of even of that really, really good meat that we eat. So the idea of having meat every day or even necessarily meat every week is it's not necessary anymore. We need a holistic view. We don't need, I think, my invitation is that we explore a more holistic view, everything to do with food and farming and nutrition, and climate. And I feel that most meat comes into that. I think, in a way, I feel our biggest challenge is around poultry and pigs, because we have legislation which disallows us uh, to recycle food for pigs, which is what used to happen only a few generations ago. Which is utilizing food waste and turning it into good, nutritious meat. And with poultry, we've hybridized them, as we were talking earlier about the chicken and the egg, to the extent where it's a very energy and protein intense piece of meat, that really, again, doesn't serve us very well, when we could actually be getting an awful lot more of that from grass and after crops and stuff, foraging for the waste of crops. So there is a different way, a more holistic way of approaching all this. It may seem a little bit idealistic, but I believe that if we dismantle the industrial side, the more we do that, the more we'll encourage human scale farming and food systems, which I believe are our best bet of an approach for the future.
Yeah, that's great. I often feel for the consumer because, I have conversations with people every week, and it's not always on the environmental side of what we eat and what we drink, but it often comes up. And even doing all of that research, it's really complicated sometimes to know, what we should eat and what we shouldn't eat. The omnivore's dilemma, I guess, as the famous book goes. One of the key reasons for that. So we then end up going, okay, well, let's use these accreditations. So whether that be organic or whether that be MSC, we look at those because it should simplify our decision making. But I remember again chatting to Guy Watson, and I think he was explaining to me, some of the things that can be done. This sort of industrial scale organic, I suppose. And I think the example he gave me was in France, where they were injecting steam into the soil to bring the temperature up to a level where it would kill the bacteria, because they weren't allowed to use chemicals. However, they were using so much fuel in the process of creating all this steam, and it just feels like it goes against the principles of the accreditation. How does the consumer trust? I think MSC was another one when I looked into it. And again, I've not done this for some time, so this might be out of date. But at the time I was looking at it in the restaurant, we were looking at salmon, and it was caught off the Alaskan coast, frozen at sea, sent to China for packaging, and then distributed around the world. With the complexity as to what can go on, what's your thoughts on how we make sure that this accreditation remains meaningful?
I mean, I think first of all, the going back to the localizing our food system and connecting with our producers wherever possible makes a massive difference. Over and above that, we need the layers of accreditation, and uh, it's what really all we can do, I guess, in a way, really, is look behind the label and the motivations for having that certification. So, is the certification corrupted? And sadly, we know that in some cases in America, some of the standards of organic are allowing things that the Soil Association certainly wouldn't allow. Um, and I do think that the Soil Association standards are, of course they're flawed. I mean, there isn't standards which aren't flawed, but they are. They've got great integrity, and they've got probably the best stab at good organic standards that are available around the world. But yeah, so I think accreditation is important, and I think we always need to challenge that accreditation to do better. But ultimately, I think the most important thing is going back to that human scale and connecting with where your food comes from, wherever it's possible.
Yeah, yeah, I agree 100%. And the closer we can make the connection, and it's been great in the restaurant when I've been able to bring some of our suppliers in, to meet the consumers, which is it's a really a privilege, I suppose, to be able to do that. It feels hard in the restaurant world to as you said, your cafes maybe break even, but not just from a financial motivation to buy organic in the restaurant. Actually, just from a supply sort of perspective, I chat to a lot of my fresh produce providers, and there just seems to be a very limited amount, if any, organic produce available at a commercial level at the sort of scale we're talking about. Am I misinformed to that, or is there a challenge around how to get organic food from the fields, to the restaurants?
What scale are you talking about? Is this?
Just a few restaurants. I'm not Weatherspoons, so
Yeah.
I've only got three.
There is no doubt that anybody who chooses to get a lot of certified organic produce can get a lot of certified organic produce, and they will be challenged on margin, which is why there isn't thousands of organic restaurants around the country, which is sad, because I think we could really do with having more focus in the hospitality trade on the provenance of food and its how sustainable it is, because there is an awful lot around sustainable restaurants, etc., and yet it doesn't actually focus very much on its impact on soil, and all the other benefits of organic certification. Um, but there's no doubt about it that there is a global supply chain of really good organic foods, and there is no reason why we can't expand that exponentially.
Okay. And any particular, are you aware of any that specialise? Because I guess we always try and buy local, so we are using the sort of the local suppliers. So maybe it's it. But are there national, sort of commercial organic providers that you know of?
Well, there's lots of distributors of dry foods that specialise in organic. Some of them are cooperatives. I mean, they have a lot of non-organic as well, but they have a massive range of organic, grains and pulses and tins and oils and cheese and you name it. And then when it comes down to fresh produce, the more local you can get, the better. But there are also regional. I don't know much about the national network of organic fruit and veg, but certainly there are a lot of really good London wholesalers who distribute to. Well, actually, as it happens, they did. They have a fairly strong trade in catering in London, so there are some people doing it for sure.
Mm.
These companies are
Okay.
turning over billions between,
Yep.
so it's a pretty well oiled ship.
Yeah.
Um,
All right. Well, I need to look harder. I might follow that up with you separately if you've got any contacts. We're very almost out of time, Phil. So I just want to touch on the future because it's great. I love the journey you've been on. Like I say, I think that the journey really illustrates the depth of knowledge that you've got on this from those early days of running around the country yourself and meeting people to this excellent business that you've now built. If I just look again on a local level, I suppose if I want to go to a U, there's not a U in my hometown of Bournemouth. I'm not even sure that there's anybody doing anything close to what you're doing. What's the future plan? Do you see, I suppose, is it a U? Is it a better food in spread a lot more across the country, or do you think there's going to be a growth of other people in this field? And why is it? Why is it that every town in the country doesn't have an organic kind of whole food shop already?
well, it's called supermarket monopolies, and certainly whenever independents grow to a point where they're doing something really interesting and there's a lot of uptake and demand for it, the supermarkets then say, "Oh, look at what they've done. Let's do that." And we've seen evidence of that over generations. So that's a kind of anti-supermarket plug to a degree, but let's also be generous. What I would like to see, better food are definitely expanding the number of stores. We have a rollout plan that over the next 5 or 10 years, we hope to have at least another store a year, and so we will be branching out into other places. But I hope that part of what that will do it will inspire others to do similar things. and they already are. There are a number of people I know who are expanding at the moment in Brighton and London, and so the offering is growing. But I hope that ultimately what happens, and I think this will happen sooner than we think, is that the supermarkets will be having conversations about the sustainability of the food system that they are so entrenched in. And if they're not careful, as Mark Carney said, they're going to find themselves on the wrong side of the fence. So I'd be amazed if they're not already having boardroom conversations around this. And I really hope that our influence, that they come to us to a degree to learn and to do something radically different.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. I suppose it's a bit like the oil and gas industry, isn't it? You kind of think, look, if you burn all the oil and gas, then you're not going to have a business. And it's the same with the supermarkets. If you destroy all of the farms, then you're not going to have a business. And there feels like a certain uncomfortable irony that now the big oil and gas players are the ones investing in green energy. But you're right, actually, sometimes you've just got to think of the solution, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, good luck. That's if you can roll out another 10 or so in the next 10 years, please. If you wouldn't mind doing me a favour, because I'm really busy, and much as I would like to build one, I don't want to have to do it. So if you could put one in Bournemouth for me, that would be very much appreciated. I'll do some market research for you.
Can you do something for me and find a good site, a really, really choice site, and we'll come down and put one in your town.
Well, there you go. That sounds like a challenge. Okay, we'll pair up. For people that want to, A, I suppose, buy the book, and B, follow your adventures, where's the best place for people to head to see what's going on in your world, Phil?
Well, to follow the adventures, go to the Better Food website, and you can order the book through the website through an outfit called Good 60, or you can get it in your local bookshop. If they haven't got it in already, which they may have once they're allowed to open again, you can ask them to do that, and that would be a favour to me as well. So it's always nice to support your local bookshop. Otherwise, you can go to the big boys online. There's plenty of them. You know who they are, and they've all got the book, and would be delighted to sell it to you, I'm sure.
Perfect. Okay, no more big plugs for them, and I will put a link up in the show notes to sort of your various social media channels and stuff like that, so people can find it easily. But just thanks for two things really. One, for sparing the time to chat today, but much more than that, I think, is just you've been banging this drum about the problems we're creating for the planet and our soil and where food comes from for multiple decades. So yeah, just a thanks for doing it and bringing it to our attention, and I hope you continue to do so. But yeah, really enjoyed chatting to you.
Oh, thank you, Mark. I appreciate your gratitude on that. That's good.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Phil.
All right. Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this week's episode. At the moment, I'm only releasing shows every other week rather than weekly due to needing to focus some time and energy in getting my restaurants and hotel back open. But I will be back in 2 weeks' time. Links to Phil's book and social media can be found on the website humansofhospitality.co.uk, where you can also sign up to the newsletter so you know when a new show has been released, with easy access to any links discussed in that episode. Okay, have a great couple of weeks. Best of luck if you are opening the doors to your business, or simply go out and enjoy a pint on a terrace somewhere, and I'll be back soon. Cheers.